Hi everyone, my name is Natasha Balfour and this is Become Okay Anyways. Did you know that there are 3 vital types of attachment that every single person on this earth needs to know? In this episode, I'm going to be explaining these different types of attachment so that you can apply them practically in your life. So there are 3 different types of attachment: secure, anxious attachment, and avoidant attachment. Secure attachment is able to have healthy bonds with other people. This means that they're good at communicating by expressing their emotions, they're respectful of boundaries. Secure attachments are not overly suspicious or jealous, and they tend to be warm, loving, empathetic, and comfortable with openness. Essentially, they have confidence in both themselves and other people. This means that they can use their relationships as a safe base for exploring the world. Essentially, people with secure attachments tend to be very good partners, right? Secure attachment is said to be developed from parents who were very consistent and reliable emotionally and physically, which means the person learned to trust other people, but also found confidence in their own judgment and their identity. So they tend to have very loving, long-term relationships, right? Another type of attachment is called anxious attachment. This is an insecure type of attachment, which is driven by a strong desire for closeness combined with a fear of abandonment and rejection. So people with this style often need constant reassurance, they seek intense intimacy, and they may feel unworthy of love or dependent on others. Essentially, anxious attachments are very sensitive to the way their partner acts, and they essentially want to be as close to their partner as possible. They think about relationships a lot. They don't feel complete unless they have someone a lot of the time. By the way, these aren't like boxes, right? Obviously, everyone differs, but these are the general characteristics of each attachment. A lot of the time, they might exhibit high emotional sensitivity. Anxious attachments struggle with trusting their partner, so they constantly need this feeling of reassurance that their partner still loves them and still wants to be with them. I actually am an anxious attachment, so when I was in relationships, I would need that partner to be securely attached because I needed that constant reassurance. If I didn't hear from my partner for more than 6 hours, I would start to get worried. If my partner wouldn't communicate properly, tell me that he was going somewhere or doing something so he wouldn't be able to respond to me, I would get very anxious and worried. The best thing to do is to accept your anxious attachment style. You cannot suppress it. It will not go away. You'll just be miserable. Basically, if you have an anxious attachment, you cannot be with what we're going to call an avoidant in a second. You need to be with a secure attachment who can fulfill your needs. So for me, when I'm talking to a man, I make sure that he's a secure attachment. Now, what you can do is you can ask him to take a test. Obviously don't make it a serious thing. You can be like, oh, have you heard about this theory, right? Make it subtle. Don't just be like, I'm giving you an assessment, right? But what I do now is I kind of just know, guys, read the book Attached. That's a great book, but this is just kind of a summary. I read it when I was very young because I couldn't understand why I was so attached to this man. And I couldn't understand this man's, actions because they were just so different from mine. His brain works so differently from mine. And this book actually saved me. And I do believe that this should be taught everywhere. But I know that as an anxious attachment, I have those needs and I'm not going to ignore them. Yes, obviously, I understand that it might be difficult for some people. And that's why I won't be dating certain people who can't, keep up with it. I wouldn't say I'm clingy. I wouldn't say that I need to be with someone constantly, but I do need that consistent communication. I think most people need that, it's just respectful. But for me, I need a partner who's mindful of the fact that, I do get anxious if they don't respond to me, if they're not communicating properly. I worry about these things. So I need someone who can calm those worries, right? Honestly, guys, not being in a relationship just calms those worries anyway. You don't need to, be bothered with that. But at the end of the day, guys, you can be with someone who knows you and knows what you need. And if they can't give you that, then it's better to be single. Don't ever suppress your needs. That's what I did. Because when I was younger, I didn't understand what anxious attachment was. I didn't understand that, I get attached and, my life kind of depends on the person in a sense because, their feelings affect my feelings very strongly. And if they're acting horrible towards me, then I'm going to feel terrible, and I can't fix that. That's just who I am. At the end of the day, your attachment style is said to be set too, and that's it. There's nothing you can do about it. So you need to just embrace it as part of your lifestyle at this point. It's very important to do that because if you don't, you will be miserable. Avoidant attachment is said to come from parents who had inconsistent love. So, for example, a child only felt loved if they behaved in a certain way or they didn't get, a physical affection all the time. It was only based on how the parent felt. And so they basically learned that they need to work for love and that love is not this stable construct, unlike obviously the secure who had parents that were always, physically and emotionally consistent. The third type of attachment is avoidant attachment, where a person feels uncomfortable with emotional closeness and has a very high desire for independence. This is because they have difficulty trusting or depending on other people because they believe that other people are inherently bad and will hurt them because they can't be depended on, basically. Avoidants often suppress or minimize their own emotions, avoid intimacy, and prioritize self-reliance. And this means that they can withdraw from their relationships if they feel like they're getting too close. In the dating pool, avoidance often seen as having no emotions and, they aren't able to connect to you. And a lot of the time people assume that they don't want to. And most of the time, it's not that, avoidants want love and they want connection, but they want more the control without the emotional intimacy and the accountability. So, for example, they might romanticize having a girlfriend, but they don't want the same accountability that comes with that girlfriend. They don't want to, be dependent on that girlfriend, and they don't want to deal with the needs of that girlfriend. Essentially, they're looking for the highs in the relationship without the lows. A lot of the time when you think you're getting closer to an avoidant, you're actually getting further away, because the more that you try to get close with them, for example, say that you have a date and it's all very well, you connect very well, this guy's funny, whatever. And, you think, okay, this could be something. The next day, after you've had a lovely day, they're gone. They're not available, they're busy, right? And until maybe like a week, when they decide again they want, the highs of emotional intimacy, they come back. I feel like society quite validates the behavior by going, oh, people are just busy. But no one is that busy to not even be able to send you like a text. Do you know what I mean? I feel like we give too much validation to this. I understand that obviously it comes from their own insecurity, because they don't believe that they can trust other people, and they believe that, being better is alone. They often believe that having sexual intimacy is better if you're not in a relationship, because, you don't have all those like feelings and like, there's no chance of getting hurt. Avoidants often seem really nonchalant and detached. Avoidants often come across very like nonchalant and detached, which actually creates an attraction, especially for the anxious, right? However, it's interesting because once you actually leave an avoidant alone, you decide, I don't want anything to do with this man, that's when these people come back, because they need you to avoid, right? If you're not trying to get close to them, then they have nothing to avoid. So that's when they come back. That's when they think it's safe. And again, when you think, oh, maybe this could be something, maybe we could be in a relationship, they're disappeared. They're gone. Now we're going to talk about the avoidant and the anxious dynamic, and why it is crucial that you avoid it. Anxious and avoidance are actually drawn to each other, surprisingly, because it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So the anxious tries to get as close as possible to the avoidant, and as the anxious thinks it's getting closer, the avoidant actually is getting further and further away. Essentially, the avoidant needs the anxious to chase it, right? So it creates this kind of like high and low, right? In these relationships, the anxious is often very desperate to gain any kind of interaction or approval from the avoidant. So it creates this almost like addiction, this like roller coaster of emotions, and it's actually really awful for the anxious. I suppose to the avoidant, it's also not nice because they feel like they're having to avoid or like run away from something. But for the anxious, it's especially sad because they're constantly just hyper fixated on the avoidant, and the avoidant is trying to be as distant as possible without actually leaving their life. The anxious will start using protest behaviors, so like excessive contacting, acting out emotionally, trying to make that partner jealous. Maybe they'll deliberately not message in order to try to, get that partner to chase them. But essentially, there is no winning here. And it's really important, if you have an anxious avoidant attachment, you cannot be with an anxious and avoidant. It doesn't work. You will just be miserable. If you have one of these insecure attachments, you need to find yourself a secure partner. And how you do that is when you first go on a date with someone, you need to identify their attachment style. Guys, it's so easy to do this. Like, it's so easy to understand. Like, literally read the book, honestly. For me, I can't really explain to you guys how to see it more than what I've said, because for me, I kind of see it now instinctively. It's like second nature, because I've known about this since I was like 14, 15 years old. So for me, it's really, really easy to tell. I would definitely recommend reading the book Attached, because it has so many brilliant insights and you can really understand attachment. Because guys, this scientific research is only around like 10 to 15 years old. It's not very old at all. And, our parents were not taught this. So it's really, really important that we teach it. They do teach it in school now, but only at a very high level. So that's quite annoying. I think everyone should know this. I think from childhood, they should teach you what your attachment style is, because it is part of you, and yes, it does come from obviously, your childhood, and it cannot be changed. Avoidant attachment often comes from like negligent parenting. So it doesn't have to be physical, but it can be emotional. So for example, the child was rewarded if they didn't show emotions, if they didn't cry, right? And so the child learns to handle their emotions on their own, but they also learn that they can't rely on other people if they're, feeling emotional. But these people do actually want connection. That's why they do go out into the world and find partners. But a lot of the time in these relationships, it's quite difficult to become close to the avoidant. By the way, guys, yes, obviously, you can work on your anxious attachment style. Like, you can see your self-sabotaging behaviors, but ultimately you won't be able to change your attachment style. For example, if you're an anxious attachment, right, you can explain to your partner, please, would you mind, sending me a message every 3 to 6 hours, and just, like update me, because I get worried, so you can not constantly cling on to that partner, because you will feel assured if you're with a secure, because they'll put sanity into your mind, right? If you want to find more information on how to deal with an avoidant attachment, then you're going to have to research that, because for me, I only speak about things that I know of. And as an anxious attachment, I can tell you the things that I did to try to, minimize intensifying my relationship too much and putting too much pressure on the person. But I would essentially say that if I have a secure partner who makes me feel happy and safe, then I don't have to act out. Like, I don't need to, constantly be with this person. I don't need to constantly talk to this person. When I was in a secure relationship with someone who had a secure attachment, right, I would just say like, oh, I need to do this, I'm not going to respond for a while. And this person would do the same to me. But I knew that if I needed that person, I could just ring him up and say like, hey, like, I'm feeling sad, or like, whatever. And I knew that this person would come. If this is the first time you're hearing about these psychological concepts, by the way, there is scientific information behind this. There was an experiment done called Strange Situation by Mary Ainsworth. I'm not going to go into the whole thing because it's a bit long, but if you guys are interested in the science behind it, there is scientific proof behind all of these concepts that I've told you. By the way, there is a fourth attachment style called disjointed attachment, but it's quite rare. It's basically if you didn't have parents at all. So, for example, you go from a foster home, and so you try to find closest with anyone or anything, but you're still afraid even then of, being close to someone. So it's even more intense than the avoidant. If you guys want to research more into that, you can. Maybe I'll do another episode on it because it would take a bit longer. But guys, honestly, I only talk about things that I know that I'm experienced in. And for me, I know as an anxious, I need a secure boyfriend. And when I go on dates, I try to find out which one they are. Generally, from how they talk and how they behave, it's quite obvious. Also, asking about their previous relationships makes it very obvious as well. The best thing to do is to find out what your attachment style is and adjust your entire dating life to that. And I promise you, your life will be so much easier, because you might be wondering why your partner is quite distant when you're quite, wanting to be emotionally close. It's because everyone's brains is different. Everyone had different childhoods. So everyone has learned to attach and to love in different ways. And you just need to find someone who will love in the way that you need, because, we're all different. We all have different, wants and desires. And you can't make it work with someone whose brain is wired completely opposite to yours. So best advice I'll ever give you in relationships, find a secure attached partner, honestly. If you're securely attached, you could be with avoidant and anxious, that's great. But if you're an avoidant or an anxious, be with a secure, okay? Guys, thank you so much for listening. My name is Natasha Balfour, and this has Become a Cat Anyways.